The moment Helena Sawyer's fingers closed around the warm loaf of bread sitting outside the general store, she knew her luck had finally run out. A strong hand clamped down on her wrist before she could even think about running, and she found herself staring up into the bluest eyes she had ever seen, belonging to a man whose dusty brown hat shadowed a face that was both stern and startlingly handsome. "Well now," the cowboy said, his voice low and steady, "that is not yours, miss." Helena's heart hammered against her ribs as she tried to yank her arm free, but his grip, though not painful, was unyielding. She was 20 years old, far too old to be caught stealing like some common thief, but desperation had a way of making criminals out of decent people. Her siblings' hollow cheeks and empty bellies flashed through her mind, giving her courage she did not truly feel. "Please," she whispered, her brown eyes filling with tears that were not for show. "Please, I have 2 little ones at home who have not eaten in 2 days. Our father died in the mines last month, and our mother passed giving birth to my baby brother 3 years ago. I will do anything, sir, but please do not turn me into the marshal." The year was 1873, and Sonora, California was still rough around the edges despite the gold rush days being mostly behind them. The mines still produced enough to keep the town alive, but for families without a man to work them, survival meant clinging to the very edge of existence. Helena had tried everything she could think of to keep her siblings fed, taking in washing, mending clothes, even chopping wood when she could find work. But it was never enough. The cowboy studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered skin that spoke of years spent outdoors. His clothes were well worn but clean, and the gun belt slung low on his hips marked him as someone who knew how to handle himself. Helena noticed all of this in the space of a few heartbeats, even as fear continued to course through her veins. "What is your name?" he asked finally. "Helena Sawyer," she answered, deciding that honesty might be her only hope now. "I live in the old cabin at the end of Porter Street. The one with the broken shutter. And the little ones, Thomas is 7, and baby Margaret just turned 3 last week." Her voice cracked on her sister's name. "They are waiting for me to bring something home. They do not know I have been stealing. They think I have been finding work." Something shifted in the cowboy's expression, a softening around his eyes that gave Helena the first real hope she had felt since his hand had caught her wrist. He released her arm and reached into his vest pocket, pulling out a leather wallet that looked surprisingly full for a working man. "Come with me," he said, gesturing toward the general store's front door. Helena's first instinct was to run, to take advantage of her freedom and disappear into the alleys she knew so well, but something in his tone made her pause. This was not the voice of a man planning to humiliate her or see her arrested. Against her better judgment, she followed him into the store, clutching her empty basket against her chest like a shield. The proprietor, Mr. Henderson, looked up from behind his counter with a scowl already forming on his round face. "Quincy Vaughn, if you are here about extending your credit again, I already told you last week." "No credit needed today, Henderson," Quincy interrupted, placing several coins on the counter with a soft clink that made the shopkeeper's eyes widen. "I need you to fill this young lady's basket with provisions. Bread, flour, salt pork, beans, whatever you have got that will keep a family fed for a good while." Helena stared at Quincy in shock, unable to process what was happening. "Sir, I cannot accept you can and you will," Quincy said firmly but not unkindly. "Consider it an advance on your wages." "My wages," Helena repeated, confused. Quincy turned to face her fully, and she was struck again by how intensely blue his eyes were, like the California sky on a cloudless day. I own a ranch about 5 miles outside of town. My housekeeper passed away last winter, and the place has been falling apart around me ever since. I need someone who can cook, clean, and keep things running while I handle the cattle and the land. The job comes with room and board, and I can pay you $15 a month. Helena's mind reeled. $15 a month was more than she had been able to scrape together in the past 3 months combined. But suspicion crept in alongside her desperate hope. She had heard stories about men who made offers that seemed too good to be true, who took advantage of women with nowhere else to turn. As if reading her thoughts, Quincy added, "There is a separate cabin on the property, small but sturdy. You and your siblings would have your own space. I keep to the main house. All I need is someone to make sure I've got clean clothes, hot meals, and a house that does not look like a pack of wild animals has been living in it." Mr. Henderson was already loading items into Helena's basket, his movements quick and efficient now that money had changed hands. Helena watched as bread, flour, a precious packet of sugar, dried beans, salt pork, and even a small tin of peaches accumulated in her basket until it was heavy with more food than she had seen in weeks. "I do not know what to say," Helena admitted, her throat tight with emotion. "Say yes," Quincy replied simply. "Say you will take the job and give those kids of yours a fighting chance." Helena thought about Thomas, who was trying so hard to be the man of the house despite being barely more than a child himself. She thought about Margaret, whose 3rd birthday had passed without even a small cake to mark the occasion. She thought about the landlord who had threatened to evict them if they could not pay the rent by the end of the week. "Yes," she said, the word coming out stronger than she felt. "Yes, I will take the job, Mr. Vaughn." "Quincy," he corrected, a small smile finally breaking through his serious expression. "If we are going to be working together, might as well use first names. When can you and the children be ready to move out to the ranch?" "We do not have much to pack," Helena admitted. "We could be ready by tomorrow if that suits you." Quincy nodded. "I will bring a wagon around to your cabin tomorrow morning, first light. That will give you time to get the young ones fed and settled with the idea of moving." As they left the general store, Helena carrying her now heavy basket, she felt as if she were moving through a dream. The weight of the food was real enough, solid and present in her arms, but the sudden reversal of her fortunes seemed too miraculous to be true. She had gone from certain disaster to unexpected salvation in the span of minutes. "Mr. Vaughn Quincy," she corrected herself quickly. "Why did you do this? You could have just turned me in to the marshal like most men would have." Quincy was quiet for a moment as they walked down Sonora's main street, dust kicking up around their boots. The afternoon sun beat down on them, typical for a California summer even in the mountains. "Finally," he said, "I lost my own mother when I was about your brother's age. My father did his best, but it was hard. I remember what it felt like to go to bed hungry, to watch him work himself into an early grave trying to keep us fed. When I saw you take that bread, I did not see a thief. I saw someone trying to survive the only way they knew how." Something in his voice told Helena there was more to the story, depths of grief and struggle that matched her own, but she did not press. They were still strangers, after all, despite this sudden arrangement between them. "I will work hard," she promised. "I will earn every penny you pay me, and I will pay you back for the food too once I have saved up enough." Quincy shook his head. "No need. Like I said, consider it an advance. You will have plenty to do at the ranch to work it off." They reached the end of Porter Street, where Helena's cabin sagged against the hillside like an old woman too tired to stand up straight. The broken shutter hung at an angle, and several roof shingles were missing, but it was the only home Thomas and Margaret had ever known. Helena felt a sudden rush of embarrassment at letting Quincy see how they had been living. "Tomorrow morning," Quincy said, tipping his hat to her. "First light." "We will be ready," Helena assured him, watching as he turned and walked back toward the center of town, his long stride eating up the dusty road. Helena pushed open the cabin door to find Thomas trying to entertain Margaret with a shadow puppet game, using the afternoon light that slanted through the grimy window. Both children looked up at her entrance, their faces brightening despite their obvious hunger. "Helena!" Margaret cried, running to her on unsteady legs. "You are home!" Thomas stood more slowly, trying to maintain the dignity of his 7 years, but his eyes went straight to the basket. "Did you find work?" "Better," Helena said, setting the basket down on their rickety table and lifting Margaret into her arms. "I found us a new home." As she unpacked the food and explained about Quincy and the ranch, watching Thomas's eyes grow wider with each revelation, Helena felt something she had not experienced in months. Hope. Real, tangible hope that maybe, just maybe, they were going to be all right. That night, after the children had eaten their fill of bread and salt pork for the first time in days and fallen asleep with full bellies, Helena lay awake on her thin mattress and wondered about the man who had changed their lives with a single act of kindness. She wondered what kind of ranch he ran, what his house looked like, and whether he would be a fair employer. Most of all, she wondered if she had made the right decision in accepting help from a stranger, no matter how desperately they needed it. But when morning came and she heard the sound of wagon wheels outside their cabin just as the sun was beginning to paint the sky pink and gold, Helena pushed her doubts aside. She woke Thomas and Margaret, helped them into their threadbare clothes, and gathered their few possessions into a single battered trunk that had belonged to her mother. Whatever lay ahead at Quincy Vaughn's ranch, it had to be better than slowly starving in this falling-down cabin. Quincy was waiting beside a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 strong-looking horses. He had cleaned up since yesterday, Helena noticed, his dark hair still damp and his jaw freshly shaven. When he saw the children, his expression softened in a way that immediately put Helena more at ease. "You must be Thomas," Quincy said, extending his hand to the boy. "Your sister tells me you have been taking good care of things here." Thomas shook Quincy's hand solemnly, standing as tall as his small frame would allow. "Yes, sir, I have been trying my best." "That is all any man can do," Quincy replied seriously, treating the boy with a respect that made Thomas's thin chest puff out with pride. Margaret, less reserved than her brother, tugged on Quincy's pant leg. "Are you the nice man with the food?" Quincy crouched down to her level, his weathered face breaking into a genuine smile. "I suppose I am. And you must be Miss Margaret. Are you ready to see your new home? There is a creek with frogs and chickens, and maybe if you are good, I will let you help me feed the horses." Margaret's face lit up like a lantern, and she began chattering excitedly about horses and frogs as Quincy lifted her into the back of the wagon where he had spread out several thick blankets to cushion the ride. Thomas climbed up beside his sister, trying to look brave despite the uncertainty in his young eyes. Helena took Quincy's offered hand to climb up onto the wagon seat, feeling the calluses on his palm that spoke of hard physical work. As he released her hand and moved around to the driver's side, she found herself noticing small details about him. The easy way he moved, the quiet competence in his actions, the kindness that seemed to come naturally when dealing with her siblings. The ride out of Sonora took them through rolling foothills dotted with oak trees and the occasional pine. The landscape was beautiful in the morning light, golden grass rippling in the breeze like waves on a dry ocean. Helena had not been out of town in years, not since her father had brought them all to Sonora, chasing dreams of gold that had ultimately cost him his life. "The ranch has been in my family for about 10 years, Quincy explained as they rode, apparently comfortable with the silence but willing to fill it with information. "My father bought the land with money he had saved from years of working other people's cattle. He built the house and the barns, got the first herd started. When he passed 5 years ago, it all came to me." "No other family?" Helena asked, then immediately worried she had overstepped, but Quincy did not seem offended by the question. "Had a younger brother, Daniel. He was killed in a stampede 3 years ago. It was just him and me after our father died. Since then, it has been just me and whatever ranch hands I can afford to hire on during busy seasons. Right now, it is just me and an old cowhand named Rusty who comes by a few times a week to help with the heavy work." "I am sorry for your losses," Helena said quietly, understanding now why he had been so sympathetic to her own situation. They were both orphans in their own way, both struggling to build something from the wreckage of their family tragedies. "Life out here is hard," Quincy said simply. "You learn to keep moving forward or you get buried by the grief." They crested a rise, and Helena caught her first glimpse of Quincy's ranch spread out in the valley below. It was larger than she had expected, with a solid-looking 2-story house painted white with dark green shutters, a big red barn, several smaller outbuildings, and what looked like extensive fencing marking out pastures where cattle grazed peacefully. A line of cottonwood trees followed what must be the creek Quincy had mentioned, their leaves shimmering in the breeze. "It is beautiful," Helena breathed, unable to hide her amazement. Behind her in the wagon bed, Thomas let out a low whistle of appreciation while Margaret bounced excitedly. "Look at all the cows. Are those all yours, Mr. Quincy?" "Most of them," Quincy confirmed, guiding the horses down the gentle slope toward the ranch. "About 200 head right now. It is not the biggest operation in the county, but it is mine, paid for and clear." As they drew closer, Helena could see that the house, while well built, showed signs of neglect that confirmed Quincy's claims about needing a housekeeper. The porch needed sweeping, the windows were clouded with dust, and the flower beds that someone had once carefully tended were now overrun with weeds. Still, the bones of the place were good, solid, and strong like the man who owned it. Quincy brought the wagon to a stop in front of a small cabin set about 50 yards from the main house. It was simple but appeared sturdy, with a stone chimney and real glass in the windows. Compared to the wreck they had been living in, it looked like a palace to Helena. "Let me show you inside," Quincy said, jumping down from the wagon and coming around to help Helena down. His hands were steady on her waist as he lifted her to the ground, and Helena felt a strange flutter in her stomach that she firmly ignored. This was her employer, nothing more, and she could not afford to complicate this blessed arrangement with foolish thoughts. The cabin interior was clean but sparse, with a main room that held a small cookstove, a table with 4 chairs, and a rocking chair by the fireplace. 2 small bedrooms branched off the main room, each with a simple bed frame and mattress. After living in a single room with her siblings for so long, having separate spaces seemed impossibly luxurious. "The previous housekeeper lived here with her husband," Quincy explained. "They were both elderly, and when she passed, he moved to San Francisco to live with their daughter. I have not had anyone in here since. The bedding is all fresh, though. I had it cleaned in town last month, thinking I would eventually need to hire someone." Margaret ran from room to room, delighted with everything, while Thomas inspected the cabin with serious eyes, checking the windows and the stove as if he were the one responsible for approving the accommodations. "It is more than adequate," Helena said, her voice thick with emotion. "It is wonderful. Thank you, Quincy." He shifted uncomfortably, as if unused to gratitude. Well, come on then. Let me show you the main house so you know what you are getting yourself into. If the cabin was charming, the main house was impressive despite its current state of disarray. The front door opened into a spacious parlor with real upholstered furniture covered in dust cloths, and a stone fireplace big enough to stand in. Beyond that was a dining room with a large oak table and china cabinet, and then the kitchen, which was larger than Helena's entire previous cabin had been. The kitchen was a housekeeper's dream, with a massive cast iron stove, plenty of counter space, a proper pantry, and a hand pump that brought water right into the house. Helena ran her hand over the counters, already imagining the meals she could prepare here, the bread she could bake, the comfort she could bring back to this neglected space. Upstairs are 4 bedrooms, Quincy continued. I use the master bedroom at the end of the hall. The others are closed up. There is also a study downstairs off the parlor where I do the ranch accounts and paperwork. When would you like me to start? Helena asked, already mentally cataloging all the work that needed to be done. Tomorrow is soon enough, Quincy said. Today, get yourself and the children settled in. There is a root cellar behind your cabin stocked with basics, and you are welcome to take eggs from the chicken coop whenever you need them. I usually eat breakfast at sunrise, lunch around noon, and supper at dusk, but I am not particular about timing as long as there is food eventually. What about your preferences? Foods you like or do not like? Quincy gave her a wry smile. Miss Sawyer, I have been living on my own terrible cooking for months now. Anything that does not taste like burned leather will be a vast improvement. But if you are asking, I am partial to apple pie, beef stew, and biscuits that do not break teeth. Helena found herself smiling back. I think I can manage that. For the rest of the day, Helena and the children explored their new home. Thomas discovered the creek and spent hours catching frogs and watching the water flow over smooth stones. Margaret made friends with the chickens, naming each one despite Helena's gentle warning not to get too attached to animals that were ultimately meant for eating. Helena herself began the process of making the cabin feel like home, unpacking their few belongings and marveling at having real beds to sleep in, and a stove that did not smoke. That evening, as the sun set behind the hills in a blaze of orange and red, Quincy appeared at their door with a basket containing a roasted chicken, fresh bread, and a jar of honey. "Picked this up in town before I came to get you this morning," he explained, looking uncharacteristically awkward standing on their small porch. "Thought you might not be up to cooking after a day of moving." "That is very thoughtful," Helena said, taking the basket and catching the scent of the still warm chicken. Her stomach growled audibly, making both of them laugh. "Well, I will let you folks get settled," Quincy said, backing away. "If you need anything, the main house is always open." As Helena watched him walk back toward his house in the gathering dusk, she felt that strange flutter again, that awareness of him not just as her employer but as a man. A kind man, a lonely man perhaps, someone who had extended extraordinary compassion to a desperate stranger. She pushed the feeling away as she called the children to supper. There would be time enough to sort through her confused emotions later. For now, she had siblings to feed and a new life to begin. The next morning, Helena woke before dawn, a habit born from years of trying to get work done before Thomas and Margaret needed her attention. She dressed quietly, left a note for the children who were still sleeping, and made her way through the cool morning air to the main house. The kitchen was as much a disaster as she remembered, with dirty dishes piled in the sink, dust covering every surface, and the pantry in desperate need of organization. But Helena had never been afraid of hard work. She rolled up her sleeves, pumped water into a large pot, and got the stove going to heat it for washing. By the time Quincy appeared 2 hours later, following his nose to the kitchen, Helena had the dishes clean, the counters scrubbed, coffee brewing, and bacon sizzling in a cast-iron skillet. The smell of fresh biscuits baking in the oven filled the entire downstairs. "Good Lord," Quincy said from the doorway, staring at the transformation. "Is that real coffee I smell?" "It is," Helena confirmed, pouring him a cup from the pot she had found buried in the pantry. "I hope you do not mind that I took some liberties with the pantry supplies. You had the makings for a proper breakfast. They just needed to be assembled correctly." Quincy took the coffee cup like a man receiving a precious gift, inhaling the steam before taking a long sip. His eyes actually closed in pleasure, and Helena felt an unexpected warmth at being able to provide him with this simple comfort. "Miss Sawyer, if breakfast tastes half as good as this kitchen smells, I am going to wonder how I survived this long without you." Helena felt her cheeks heat at the compliment and turned back to the stove to hide her blush. "It will be ready in just a few minutes. Should I serve you in the dining room? Kitchen table is fine," Quincy said, settling into one of the chairs. "I have not used the dining room since my brother died. Seems too formal for one person." As Helena served up plates of bacon, eggs, and fluffy biscuits with butter and honey, she asked, "Would it be all right if I brought Thomas and Margaret up here for breakfast?" "I left them sleeping, but they will be awake soon." "Of course," Quincy said, already attacking his food with enthusiasm. "Bring them up. There is plenty, and it seems silly for you to have to cook twice." Helena quickly walked back to the cabin and woke the children, who were delighted at the prospect of eating in the big house. They dressed hurriedly and followed her back, Thomas trying to walk sedately while Margaret skipped ahead. Quincy watched with amusement as the children settled at the table, Thomas sitting up very straight and Margaret swinging her legs happily from a chair that was almost too tall for her. "Mr. Quincy," Margaret announced seriously, "I named all the chickens. The brown one with the spot is Princess, and the white one is Snowball, and the one with the funny walk is Dancing Sue." Quincy nodded gravely. "Those are excellent names. Very fitting." "Are you a real cowboy?" Thomas asked, eyeing Quincy with the intense curiosity of a 7-year-old boy. "Have you been on cattle drives and everything?" "I have," Quincy confirmed. "Been on 3 long drives all the way up to the railroad in Nevada. It is hard, dusty work, but there is nothing quite like moving a big herd across open country." Thomas's eyes went wide. "Could you teach me?" "About being a cowboy, I mean. I want to help. I want to earn my keep so Helena does not have to work so hard." Something shifted in Quincy's expression, a softening that made him look younger. "Tell you what, Thomas, once you are settled in a bit, I will start teaching you about ranch work. Every good ranch needs hands who know what they are doing. But," he added, looking at Helena, "you have to keep up with your schooling too. Your sister is right to make sure you are educated." Helena, who had been about to insist that Thomas focus on his reading and arithmetic, gave Quincy a grateful look. Having his support in keeping Thomas focused on education would make her job much easier. The morning set the pattern for the days that followed. Helena would wake early, prepare breakfast for everyone, clean the main house, and begin the monumental task of restoring order to a household that had been neglected for too long. The children helped where they could, with Margaret gathering eggs and Thomas learning to feed the chickens and perform small chores around the property. Quincy, for his part, was an easy employer. He was out most days working with the cattle, mending fences, or handling the dozen other tasks that came with running a ranch. He never complained about meals, never criticized Helena's work, and treated Thomas and Margaret with a patient kindness that made Helena's heart ache in unexpected ways. 3 weeks into their new life, Helena was beating dust out of curtains on the back porch when Quincy rode up on his big bay gelding, leading another horse behind him. This second horse was smaller, a pretty paint mare with gentle eyes. "Got something to show you," Quincy called out, dismounting with the easy grace of someone who had spent his whole life on horseback. Helena set down her rug beater and walked over, curious. "What is it?" "Well, I was thinking," Quincy said, rubbing the back of his neck in that way he did when he was uncomfortable, "that it is a long walk from here into town when you need supplies. And you might want to take the children on outings sometimes, or just have a way to get around that does not depend on me being available with the wagon." Helena looked at the mare, understanding dawning. "Quincy, I cannot accept a horse. That is too much." "She is not a gift," Quincy said quickly. "She is part of the job. A housekeeper needs to be able to get to town for supplies, right? And besides, Daisy here is getting too old for hard ranch work. She needs an easier life with someone who will treat her gently." Helena approached the mare slowly, extending her hand for Daisy to sniff. The horse nuzzled her palm, soft and friendly. "I do not know how to ride," Helena admitted quietly. "Then I will teach you," Quincy said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. "Tomorrow is Sunday. The ranch work can wait. We will start lessons after breakfast." Sunday morning dawned bright and clear, and after a leisurely breakfast of pancakes and sausage, Quincy brought Daisy around to the front of the house. Thomas and Margaret sat on the porch steps to watch, both excited at the prospect of their sister learning something new. "First thing you need to know," Quincy said, showing Helena how to approach the horse, "is that horses are mostly gentle creatures if you treat them with respect. Daisy here is about the calmest mare you could hope for. She has been around long enough that nothing much spooks her." He showed Helena how to saddle the horse properly, explaining each step clearly and letting her practice until she could do it herself. Then came the moment Helena had been both anticipating and dreading, actually getting on the horse. "I will help you up," Quincy said, positioning himself beside Daisy. "Put your left foot in the stirrup, and I will give you a boost." Helena did as instructed, but even with Quincy's assistance, her first attempt ended with her hanging awkwardly off the side of the horse, neither fully mounted nor safely on the ground. Quincy's hands came to her waist, steadying her, and Helena was suddenly intensely aware of his strength, his closeness, the way his touch sent warmth spreading through her. "Try again," Quincy encouraged, his voice patient. "You have got this." On the third attempt, Helena managed to swing her leg over and found herself sitting in the saddle, higher off the ground than she had expected. Her hands gripped the saddle horn tightly, and she felt her heart racing with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. "Good," Quincy said, adjusting her feet in the stirrups. "Now the first rule of riding is to relax. The horse can feel your tension and it makes her nervous too." For the next hour, Quincy led Daisy around the yard at a slow walk, teaching Helena how to sit properly, how to hold the reins, how to communicate with the horse using subtle pressure from her legs and shifts in her weight. It was harder than it looked, requiring a kind of whole-body awareness that Helena had never needed before. But gradually, she began to feel more comfortable, more in tune with Daisy's rhythm. When Quincy finally let go of the lead rope and Helena walked Daisy around the yard on her own for the first time, the sense of accomplishment was almost overwhelming. "You are a natural," Quincy said, grinning up at her. "Give it a few more lessons, and you will be racing Thomas to the creek." Helena laughed, feeling genuinely happy for the first time in longer than she could remember. "I do not know about racing, but I think Daisy and I are going to get along just fine." That evening, after the children were in bed, Helena sat on the cabin's small porch and let herself think about things she had been carefully not thinking about for weeks. She thought about how Quincy's smile made something warm bloom in her chest. She thought about the way he was with Thomas and Margaret, patient and kind, giving them the male role model they had been missing. She thought about the gentleness of his hands when he had helped her onto the horse, the way his touch had made her skin tingle. She was falling for him. The realization should have terrified her, should have sent her into a panic about jeopardizing her job and her siblings' security. But instead, she just felt a quiet wonder, like discovering something precious she had not been looking for. The question was, did Quincy feel anything similar, or was he simply being a kind employer? Helena had no experience with romance, no basis for interpreting the looks he sometimes gave her or the way he seemed to find excuses to linger in the kitchen after meals, talking about everything and nothing while she worked. She decided, sensibly, to keep her feelings to herself. She could not risk this job, could not risk her siblings' welfare, on what might just be wishful thinking on her part. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. 2 days later, Helena was in the kitchen preparing lunch when she heard the sound of multiple horses approaching. Through the window, she saw Quincy riding in with 3 other men, all of them looking trail-worn and dusty. She quickly added more potatoes to the pot and put on extra coffee, assuming these were ranch hands Quincy had hired for some project. When the men came inside, Helena immediately sensed tension. The 3 strangers had hard faces and calculating eyes that swept over the house with an assessment that made her uncomfortable. "Miss Sawyer," Quincy said, his voice carefully neutral, "these men are interested in buying some cattle. We will be discussing business in the study. Could you bring coffee in there when it is ready?" "Of course," Helena said, noting the tightness around Quincy's eyes that suggested this was not a meeting he was pleased about. She prepared a tray with coffee and some of the cookies she had baked that morning, then carried it to the study. The door was open, and she could hear the conversation as she approached. $20 a head is robbery, Vaughn, and you know it," one of the men was saying. "We will give you 15, and that is more than generous." "My cattle are prime stock," Quincy replied evenly. "Well-fed, healthy, perfect for breeding. They are worth 25 at least, so 20 is already a discount." Helena knocked softly and entered with the tray. All 4 men looked up, but it was the way the stranger's eyes tracked her movements that made her skin crawl. She set down the tray quickly and turned to leave. "Well now," one of the men said, a lean character with a scar across his cheek. "You did not mention you had such a pretty little housekeeper, Vaughn. That is quite a fringe benefit." "Miss Sawyer is my employee and under my protection," Quincy said, his voice dropping into a tone Helena had never heard from him before, cold as winter ice. "You will speak of her respectfully or not at all." The man held up his hands in mock surrender. "No offense meant. Just making an observation." Helena left quickly, her heart pounding. She busied herself with lunch preparation, trying to focus on chopping vegetables and not on the uncomfortable feeling those men had given her. She trusted that Quincy would handle whatever business needed handling, but she could not shake a sense of unease. 20 minutes later, she heard raised voices from the study, and then the sound of chairs scraping back. The 3 strangers emerged, looking angry, and stormed out of the house without a word to Helena. She watched through the window as they mounted their horses and rode off at a gallop, leaving clouds of dust in their wake. Quincy appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face grim. "I apologize for that. Those men are known cattle rustlers, though no one has been able to prove it. They wanted to buy cattle at criminal prices, probably to resell at legitimate rates and pocket the difference. I sent them packing." "Are we in danger?" Helena asked, thinking immediately of Thomas and Margaret. I do not think so, Quincy said, but he moved to the window and watched the dust trail left by the departing riders. They are cowards who prey on isolated homesteaders. This ranch is well known, and I have friends in town who would come asking questions if anything happened to me. But, he added, turning to face her seriously, I want you and the children to stay close to the house for the next few days, just as a precaution. And if any strangers come around when I am out working, you do not open the door. Understood? Helena nodded, appreciating that he took the threat seriously enough to warn her, but not so seriously that he panicked. I understand. Good. Some of the tension left his shoulders. Now is that beef stew I smell cooking. The incident with the cattle rustlers passed without further trouble, but it seemed to shift something between Helena and Quincy. He began teaching Thomas how to shoot tin cans with an old rifle, insisting that everyone on a ranch should know how to handle a weapon safely. He showed Helena where he kept a loaded pistol in the kitchen, just in case, and made sure she knew how to use it. But beyond the practical safety measures, there was a new protectiveness in the way Quincy interacted with Helena and the children. He took on additional work around the cabin, fixing loose boards and reinforcing the door lock. He made sure Helena knew exactly where he would be working each day, so she could send Thomas to fetch him if needed. Helena found herself noticing more details about him. The way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck when it got too long, the rare but devastating quality of his full smile, the competent way he handled every task from mending fences to comforting a frightened 3-year-old after a nightmare. She noticed, too, the way he sometimes looked at her when he thought she was not watching, a softness in his blue eyes that made her breath catch. Summer deepened into August, and the ranch thrived under their combined care. The house had never been so clean, the meals had never been so good, and Quincy's cattle were fat and healthy. Thomas was growing stronger from good food and outdoor work, losing his thin, hunted look and becoming the confident boy he should have been all along. Margaret had bloomed like a wildflower, chattering constantly and bringing joy to even the longest days. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, Helena was finishing up the kitchen cleaning when Quincy appeared in the doorway. He had bathed and changed after a day of hard work, and his dark hair was still damp. "Got a minute?" he asked, uncharacteristically hesitant. "Of course," Helena said, drying her hands on a towel. "Is something wrong?" "No, nothing wrong. I just wanted to say." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "You have been here almost 3 months now, and you have done more than just keep house. You have made this place feel like a home again. I did not realize how much I had been just going through the motions, surviving instead of living. So, thank you." Helena felt warmth flood through her. "You saved us, Quincy. You took a chance on someone you caught stealing, and you gave my siblings and me a future we would not have had otherwise. I think we are the ones who should be thanking you." "Maybe we saved each other," Quincy said softly, taking a step closer. The air between them seemed to thicken with something unspoken, something that had been building for months. Helena's heart was racing, and she could not seem to look away from Quincy's eyes, which were reflecting the lamplight like pieces of sky at twilight. "Helena," he said, her name rough in his throat, "I need to tell you something, and I want you to know that your job and your home here are secure no matter how you respond. You and those kids will never want for anything as long as I am alive to provide it. Do you understand?" Helena nodded, not trusting her voice. "I am falling in love with you," Quincy said simply, the words falling into the quiet kitchen like stones into still water, creating ripples that would change everything. "I have been falling for a while now, if I am honest. The way you laugh with Margaret, the way you have taught Thomas to be proud of himself, the way you hum while you work, the way you look in the morning with the sun in your hair. I am 32 years old, and I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you." Helena's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of joy, of relief, of a happiness so intense it almost hurt. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have been so afraid to even think it, afraid of ruining everything, but I do. I love you, Quincy." The distance between them disappeared as Quincy closed the gap and pulled Helena into his arms. His kiss was gentle at first, almost questioning, but when Helena responded by wrapping her arms around his neck and pressing closer, the kiss deepened into something that made her forget everything except the feel of him, the taste of him, the rightness of being in his arms. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Quincy rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast, and I know we have only known each other a few months, but I am sure. I am more sure of this than I have ever been of anything." "Yes," Helena said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, yes, yes." They kissed again, and Helena felt as if her heart might burst from happiness. She had gone from desperation and despair to love and hope in the span of a few months, and it felt like the most precious kind of miracle. When they told Thomas and Margaret the next morning at breakfast, both children erupted into cheers. Thomas, trying to be mature, shook Quincy's hand solemnly and said, "I will help you take good care of her, sir." Margaret just flung herself at Quincy and Helena simultaneously, trying to hug them both at once while squealing, "We are going to be a real family." The wedding was planned for early September, giving them just enough time to make arrangements, but not so long that the anticipation became torture. Quincy insisted on doing things properly, though Helena tried to tell him that a simple ceremony was fine. "You deserve a real wedding," he said firmly. "A dress, flowers, the whole town invited to witness it. I want everyone to know how proud I am that you are choosing to be my wife." So Helena found herself being escorted to Sonora's best dressmaker, where Quincy insisted she choose whatever she wanted without worrying about cost. The dress she eventually selected was simple but beautiful, cream-colored silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. When she tried it on and saw herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the thin, desperate woman who had been caught stealing bread just a few months earlier. The wedding took place in Sonora's small church on a perfect September afternoon. Half the town turned out, curious about the rancher who had been a bachelor for so long and the mysterious housekeeper who had captured his heart. Helena walked down the aisle with Thomas on one side and Margaret on the other, both children beaming with pride at their important roles. But Helena only had eyes for Quincy, who stood at the altar in a new black suit, his blue eyes blazing with love and promise. When she reached him and he took her hands in his, everything else faded away. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, but Helena barely heard the familiar words. She was too busy memorizing this moment. The way Quincy's hands trembled slightly as he held hers, the way he looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world, the way her heart felt like it might explode from pure joy. When it came time for the vows, Quincy's voice was strong and clear. "I, Quincy Vaughn, take you, Helena Sawyer, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, cherish you, and protect you for all the days of my life. I promise to be a good husband to you and a good father to Thomas and Margaret. I promise to build a life with you that honors the blessing we have found in each other." Helena's voice shook with emotion as she responded, "I, Helena Sawyer, take you, Quincy Vaughn, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, honor you, cherish you, and stand by your side through whatever comes. I promise to make our house a home, to be your partner in all things, and to never forget that you saw me when I was lost and gave me hope when I had none." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife and Quincy kissed her, the church erupted in applause. But Helena only heard the beating of her own heart, and Quincy's whispered, "I love you, Mrs. Vaughn." The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up under the cottonwood trees by the creek. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, and a joy that seemed to spill over everything like sunlight. Thomas proudly danced with his new sister-in-law, and Margaret sat on Quincy's shoulders for most of the afternoon, declaring to anyone who would listen that she had the best new papa in the whole world. As the sun began to set and the guests started to drift away, Quincy pulled Helena aside for a private moment by the creek. The water burbled over the rocks, and somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed peacefully. "Happy?" Quincy asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind and pulling her back against his chest. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Helena admitted, covering his hands with hers. "Sometimes I still cannot believe this is real, that I am not going to wake up back in that awful cabin with empty cupboards and no hope." "It is real," Quincy promised, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You are my wife. This is our ranch, and we are going to build a beautiful life here together." And they did. That first year of marriage was filled with the kind of happiness that Helena had only read about in books. She and Quincy fell more deeply in love with each passing day, discovering the rhythms and patterns of life together. They laughed together, worked together, and at night, in the privacy of their bedroom, they learned the language of physical love with a tenderness and passion that left them both amazed. Thomas thrived under Quincy's mentorship, becoming more confident and capable with each passing month. By his 8th birthday, he could rope a calf, mend a fence, and had even started learning to read the ranch accounts. Margaret adored her new papa and followed him around whenever he would let her, her chatter a constant background music to their days. In the spring of 1874, Helena discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a complex swirl of emotions: joy at the thought of having Quincy's child, anxiety about the dangers of childbirth, and a fierce determination to survive so she could raise all of her children. Quincy's reaction was pure elation tempered with the same fear Helena felt. "I am going to be a father," he said wonderingly, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." "Are you hoping for a boy or a girl?" Helena asked, curious. "I do not care," Quincy said honestly. "As long as you both come through healthy, that is all that matters." "But," he added with a grin, "if it is a boy, I was thinking we could name him Daniel after my brother. And if it is a girl, maybe Grace. That was my mother's name." "I love both of those," Helena said, touched that he wanted to honor his family. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, with Helena continuing her work around the house, until Quincy finally put his foot down in her 7th month and insisted she rest more. He hired a girl from town to help with the heavy housework, despite Helena's protests that she was perfectly capable. "You are carrying precious cargo," he said firmly. "My job is to take care of you both." In October, during a soft autumn rain, Helena gave birth to a healthy baby boy after a labor that was long and difficult but ultimately successful. When the midwife placed the squalling infant in her arms, Helena wept with relief and joy. He had Quincy's eyes, already showing hints of that intense blue and a shock of dark hair. "Daniel," Quincy said, his voice choked with emotion as he held his son for the first time. "Daniel Quincy Vaughn, welcome to the world, little man." Thomas was fascinated by his new nephew, and Margaret was beside herself with excitement at having a baby in the house. She insisted on helping with everything, from fetching diapers to singing lullabies in her high, sweet voice. Watching Quincy with their son, seeing the tenderness and wonder in his face, Helena felt her heart expand even further. This man who had shown her such kindness when she was at her lowest was now the father of her child, the center of her world, her partner in building a life richer than she had ever imagined possible. 2 years later, in 1876, Helena gave birth to their daughter Grace, a blue-eyed beauty who had her father wrapped around her tiny finger from the moment she was born. The ranch continued to prosper under Quincy's careful management and Helena's efficient household, and they added more land and cattle as the years passed. Thomas grew into a fine young man, eventually partnering with Quincy in running the ranch. At 20, he was everything Quincy had hoped: honest, hardworking, and devoted to family. Margaret became a teacher in Sonora, educated and confident, never forgetting the desperate circumstances she had come from or the kindness that had saved them all. Daniel and Grace grew up knowing nothing but love and security, never hungry, never afraid, surrounded by family and the kind of stability that both Helena and Quincy had lacked as children. They learned ranching from their father and compassion from their mother, and they knew the story of how their parents had met, how a moment of desperate theft had led to a lifetime of love. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Quincy took Helena back to the spot by the creek where they had stolen moments during their wedding reception. The cottonwood trees had grown taller, and the ranch had expanded, but the essential beauty of the place remained unchanged. "Do you remember what I said to you here?" Quincy asked, pulling Helena close. "You said we were going to build a beautiful life together," Helena recalled, smiling up at him. "And we have," Quincy said, looking around at the ranch, at the house where their children slept safely, at the land they had worked together to make prosper. "We really have." "When I reached for that bread," Helena said softly, "I was just trying to survive one more day. I never imagined that one act of desperation would lead to all of this, would lead to you." Quincy cupped her face in his hands, his touch as gentle as it had been that very first time. "I was just existing before you came into my life. You made me remember what it felt like to truly live, to have something worth working for beyond just getting through the days. You gave me a family, Helena. You gave me everything." They kissed under the cottonwood trees, surrounded by the sounds of their ranch, their home, their life together. In the distance, they could hear Thomas calling the cattle and Margaret's laughter floating from the house. Their children were safe and warm inside, dreaming whatever dreams children dream. Helena had learned something profound in the years since that desperate day when she had reached for a loaf of bread. That kindness could change everything, that love could grow from the most unlikely circumstances, and that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us directly to the best. She had been a thief caught in an act of desperation. Quincy had been a lonely rancher existing in the shell of his family's legacy. Together, they had become something neither could have been alone: a true partnership, a real family, a love story written in the dust and promise of the California frontier. Years continued to pass with the steady rhythm of ranch life. Seasons turned, cattle were born and sold, crops were planted and harvested. But through it all, the love between Helena and Quincy remained the steady foundation on which everything else was built. By 1885, Thomas had married a sweet girl named Emily from town, and they built their own cabin on the far edge of the ranch property. Their first child, a son they named Quincy after his grandfather, arrived in the spring, making Helena and Quincy grandparents for the first time. Holding her grandson, Helena marveled at how far life had brought her from that desperate young woman stealing bread in Sonora. Margaret had also found love, with a gentle schoolteacher from Sacramento who moved to Sonora to be near her. Their wedding was a joyous affair that brought together two families who valued education and kindness above all else. Daniel, now 11, showed every sign of being a natural rancher like his father. He had Quincy's calm competence and Helena's gentle heart, a combination that would serve him well in whatever he chose to do. Grace, at 9, was already showing signs of her mother's organizational skills and her father's determination, keeping detailed records of the chicken eggs she collected and the vegetables from her own small garden. On quiet evenings, after the work was done and the children were settled, Helena and Quincy would sit together on the porch of the main house and watch the sun set over their land. Sometimes they talked about their days, sharing the small victories and challenges of ranch life. Other times they simply sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, content in the knowledge that they had built something lasting. "You ever think about that day?" Quincy asked one such evening, his thumb tracing circles on the back of Helena's hand. "The day I caught you at the general store." "Sometimes," Helena admitted, "it feels like a lifetime ago, like it happened to different people." "In a way it did," Quincy observed. "We were both so different then, harder, lonelier, more afraid." Helena nodded, thinking about the fear that had driven her to theft, the desperation that had made every day a struggle just to survive. "I was so certain my life was over when you grabbed my wrist. I thought you were going to have me arrested, that Thomas and Margaret would end up in an orphanage or worse. I almost did turn you in," Quincy confessed. "My first instinct was to march you straight to the marshal. But then I saw your eyes, saw the real terror and desperation there, and I remembered what it felt like to be that scared. My father and I went through some lean times after my mother died. There were days when we did not know where our next meal was coming from. I could not condemn you for trying to feed your family. So you saved us instead," Helena said softly. "You gave us everything." "No," Quincy corrected, turning to face her fully. "We saved each other. You gave me a reason to care about this place again, to see it as a home instead of just a property to manage. You gave me a family and a purpose. Before you, I was just going through the motions, waiting to die like my father and brother had. You made me want to live." Tears gathered in Helena's eyes as she leaned in to kiss her husband, still moved by his words after all these years. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Quincy replied, pulling her closer. "My brave, beautiful wife who was not too proud to do what needed to be done to protect her family. You are the strongest person I have ever known." As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars began to appear, they remained on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms. From inside the house came the sounds of their children preparing for bed, Daniel reading to Grace from one of her favorite books. From across the property came the sounds of the ranch settling in for the night, cattle lowing softly, horses moving in their stalls, the wind rustling through the cottonwoods by the creek. The years continued to unfold with their mix of joy and challenge, triumph and loss. In 1889, old age finally claimed Rusty, the ranch hand who had been with Quincy since before Helena arrived. They buried him under an oak tree on a hillside overlooking the ranch, and Quincy stood at the grave with tears on his face, mourning the loss of a man who had been like an uncle to him. But life continued, as it always does. Thomas and Emily had 3 more children, filling their cabin with laughter and noise. Margaret and her husband adopted 2 children whose parents had died in a typhoid outbreak, giving them the same kind of second chance that Helena had once received. Daniel, at 16, was becoming a man, strong and capable, with a level head that promised he would make wise decisions about the ranch when it eventually passed to him. Grace, at 14, had developed a passion for medicine after helping the town doctor set a ranch hand's broken arm. Helena and Quincy encouraged her interest, even as they knew it meant she might eventually leave the ranch to pursue education in a larger city. "If she wants to be a doctor, we will support her," Quincy said firmly when Helena expressed worry about Grace leaving. "We have given our children roots, but we also need to give them wings." Helena knew he was right, even as the thought of any of her children leaving made her heart ache. But she also knew that she and Quincy had created something rare and precious. A family built on love and mutual support, where each person was free to pursue their dreams while knowing they always had a home to return to. In 1892, Helena and Quincy celebrated their 19th wedding anniversary with a party that brought together their extended family and half the town of Sonora. Helena stood in her kitchen, now aided by two young women from town who helped with the increasing demands of feeding such a large family, and marveled at how her life had turned out. She was 40 years old, still healthy and strong, with a husband who loved her as deeply as the day they married. Her siblings, once thin and desperate, were now thriving adults with families of their own. Her children were growing into remarkable young people. The ranch was prosperous and well managed. By every measure that mattered, Helena's life was a success beyond anything she could have imagined. That night, as she and Quincy prepared for bed, she said, "Do you realize that we have been together longer than we were apart? Our life together is now the majority of our story." Quincy paused in the act of removing his boots and smiled at her. "And what a story it has been." "Do you think the children will tell their own children about how we met?" "I hope so," Helena said. "I want them to know that even in your darkest moment, kindness is possible. That one person's compassion can change everything. That love can grow from the most unexpected circumstances." "You should write it down," Quincy suggested, "the whole story from your perspective, so it does not get lost or changed in the retelling." Helena considered this. "Maybe I will. When things slow down in the winter, perhaps I will start keeping a journal of our lives." She did eventually start that journal, filling page after page with memories and reflections. She wrote about the fear and desperation of those early days, about the moment Quincy's hand had caught her wrist and changed her life forever. She wrote about falling in love, about the wonder of pregnancy and childbirth, about watching their family grow and expand. She wrote about the challenges they had faced together. Drought years when water was scarce, harsh winters when they lost cattle, the constant work of maintaining a ranch in an unforgiving landscape. But mostly, she wrote about love. The love between husband and wife, the love of parents for children, the love of siblings who had survived hardship together. She wrote about how love was not just a feeling but a choice, made new each day to stand beside someone through whatever came. By 1895, as Helena and Quincy approached their 22nd anniversary, the ranch was run efficiently by a combination of family and hired help. Thomas managed the day-to-day cattle operations, while Daniel, now 21, had proven himself invaluable in handling the business side of things, negotiating prices and contracts with a shrewdness that impressed even hardened buyers. Grace had indeed left for San Francisco to pursue medical training, writing letters home filled with enthusiasm and determination. Margaret's adopted children were flourishing, showing the same resilience and strength that came from being given a second chance at life. Quincy was now 54, his dark hair liberally threaded with silver, but he was still strong and capable, still waking before dawn to check on the cattle and ride the boundaries of their land. Helena, at 43, had a few more lines around her eyes and threads of gray in her brown hair, but Quincy still looked at her as if she were the most beautiful woman in the world. "You ever regret it?" Helena asked him one morning as they shared coffee before the rest of the household woke. Taking a chance on a thief, Quincy laughed, the sound rich and warm in the quiet kitchen. Only every single day. Helena's face fell for a moment before she saw the teasing glint in his eyes. I regret, Quincy continued, reaching across the table to take her hand, that I did not catch you sooner, that you had to struggle alone for so long before fate brought us together. Every day without you feels like a waste, time I could have spent loving you. You romantic fool, Helena said, but her eyes were bright with happy tears. You're romantic fool, Quincy corrected, for the rest of my life, and he kept that promise. Through the turn of the century, through new challenges and new joys, Quincy remained Helena's steadfast partner and truest love. When a fire damaged one of the barns in 1898, they rebuilt together. When a harsh winter in 1901 killed nearly a quarter of their cattle, they endured the loss and rebuilt the herd. When Grace returned home after completing her medical training and announced her intention to open a practice in Sonora, they supported her dream and helped her find a suitable building in town. By 1903, Helena and Quincy had celebrated their 30th anniversary, surrounded by 3 generations of family. Thomas and Emily had 7 children ranging from 18 to 6. Margaret and her husband had their 2 adopted children plus 3 biological ones. Daniel had married a rancher's daughter from the next valley over, and they had recently welcomed their first child. Even Grace, busy with her medical practice, had found love with a fellow doctor and married him in a simple ceremony at the ranch. Sitting at the long table under the cottonwood trees, the same trees that had witnessed their wedding reception so many years ago, Helena looked around at the sea of faces she loved and felt a contentment so deep, it was almost painful in its intensity. "What are you thinking?" Quincy asked, covering her hand with his. "I am thinking about bread," Helena admitted with a smile. Quincy raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting that answer. "That loaf of bread I tried to steal was probably worth about 5 cents, Helena continued. 5 cents that should have been the beginning of my ruin, but instead became the beginning of all this. She gestured around at their family, their land, the life they had built. How much joy can come from something so small? How much can change in a single moment of kindness? Quincy was quiet for a moment, his eyes suspiciously bright. I think that is the point, is it not? We never know which moment is going to change everything, which choice is going to lead us to our destiny. I could have turned you in to the marshal that day. Instead, I saw someone who needed help and I chose to offer it, and that choice gave me everything I hold dear. It gave us everything, Helena corrected softly. Yes, Quincy agreed, lifting her hand to his lips. It gave us everything. As the sun set over the ranch that evening, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, Helena and Quincy stood together on the porch of the house they had shared for 30 years. Around them, their family laughed and talked, children played, and the ranch went on with its timeless rhythms. Helena leaned into Quincy's side, and he wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. They stood like that for a long time, watching the light fade and the stars emerge, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built from a single moment of compassion. "Thank you," Helena whispered finally. "For what?" Quincy asked, though his voice suggested he knew. "For seeing me," Helena said simply. "For seeing past the desperate woman stealing bread and recognizing someone worth saving. For loving me. For giving me this life." "Helena Vaughn," Quincy said, turning her to face him so he could look into her eyes, "you were always worth saving. You were always deserving of love. I just happened to be the lucky man who got the chance to prove it to you." He kissed her then, tender and sweet, a kiss that held 30 years of love and partnership and shared dreams. When they parted, both were smiling. The years that followed were gentler, as Quincy and Helena gradually stepped back from the daily running of the ranch and allowed the younger generation to take over. Daniel proved himself more than capable of managing the operation, bringing in new breeding stock and modernizing certain practices while maintaining respect for the land and animals. Thomas continued to work the cattle with the energy of a man who had found his calling. The ranch thrived under their combined stewardship. Helena spent her later years surrounded by grandchildren and great-grandchildren, teaching them to bake bread and sharing stories of the old days. She never forgot where she had come from or how close she had come to losing everything. That awareness made every moment sweeter, every blessing more precious. Grace's medical practice became one of the most respected in the region, and she never charged families who truly could not afford treatment, remembering her own family's desperate poverty. Margaret continued teaching, shaping young minds and giving opportunities to children who might otherwise have none. Thomas's children grew up strong and capable, ready to take over the ranch when their time came. In 1910, Quincy and Helena celebrated their 37th anniversary. Quincy was 69 years old, still active but slower now, content to watch the sunset from the porch rather than riding out to check the far fences. Helena, at 58, had silver in her hair and lines on her face that mapped out decades of laughter and love. They sat together on that familiar porch, hands clasped, watching another generation of children play in the yard where their own children had once played. "No regrets?" Helena asked, a question that had become something of a tradition between them. "Not a single one," Quincy replied, the answer that never varied. "You?" "Only that we do not get to do it all over again," Helena said. "I would live every moment of this life 1,000 times if I could." Quincy squeezed her hand. "Then we did something right." "We did everything right," Helena corrected. "We loved each other, we raised our children well, we built something lasting. We took a moment that could have ended in tragedy and turned it into the beginning of something beautiful." In 1915, Quincy developed a persistent cough that worried Helena despite his insistence that it was nothing. Grace examined him and prescribed rest, but they all knew that time was catching up with the man who had been the cornerstone of their family for so long. He was 74 years old and had lived a full, rich life, but that did not make the prospect of losing him any easier for Helena to bear. "I am not ready to let you go," she told him one night as they lay in bed, her hand resting over his heart. "I am not going anywhere yet," Quincy assured her, covering her hand with his. "I still have too much to live for," and true to his word, Quincy rallied. He could not work the ranch anymore, but he could sit on the porch and watch his grandchildren ride the horses, could share wisdom with Daniel about land management, could hold Helena's hand and tell her he loved her every single day. They made it to their 42nd anniversary in 1915, an occasion marked by a quiet celebration with just their immediate family. The children had wanted to throw a large party, but Quincy was too tired for such things. Instead, they gathered around the table in the kitchen where Helena had cooked thousands of meals, and they shared stories and laughter and love. "Tell us again how you met," one of the grandchildren requested, as someone always did at family gatherings. Helena and Quincy exchanged a look, a whole conversation passing between them in a glance. "Well," Helena began, her voice strong despite the emotion she felt. "It was the summer of 1873, and I was desperate and terrified and trying to steal bread to feed my siblings. And your grandfather caught me. He could have had me arrested," she continued, looking at Quincy with all the love of 42 years shining in her eyes. "He could have turned away and pretended not to see, but instead he filled my basket with food and offered me a job. He changed my entire life with a single act of kindness. She changed mine too, Quincy added softly. She made me remember what it meant to have a family, what it meant to have something worth fighting for. She gave me everything that matters. The grandchildren listened raptly, as they always did, even though they had heard the story dozens of times. It never got old, this tale of hardship overcome and love found in unlikely circumstances. That night, after everyone had left and the house was quiet, Helena and Quincy lay in bed together, holding each other close. "I meant what I said earlier," Quincy murmured into her hair. "You gave me everything that matters." "And you gave it all back to me," Helena replied. "Everything I have, everything I am, I owe to you." "No," Quincy corrected gently. "You were always strong, always capable. I just gave you the chance to prove it." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, two people who had found their perfect match in the most imperfect of circumstances. Quincy Vaughn passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 weeks after their anniversary, with Helena beside him and their family nearby. He was 74 years old and had lived to see his ranch prosper, his children succeed, and his grandchildren grow. He died knowing he was loved and had loved well in return. Helena grieved deeply but not hopelessly. She had had 42 years with the man she loved, had built a life and a legacy that would endure long after they were both gone. She continued to live in the ranch house, surrounded by family, finding comfort in her children and grandchildren, and in the knowledge that she and Quincy had done what they set out to do. They had built something lasting. She lived another 8 years, remaining sharp and engaged until the end. She finished her journal, filling in the final chapters of their story, making sure that future generations would know how it all began. She continued to bake bread, teaching her granddaughters the techniques her mother had taught her, connecting past and future through the simple act of kneading dough. In the spring of 1923, Helena passed away at the age of 70, surrounded by 3 generations of the family she and Quincy had created. Her last words were, "Tell him I am coming," and those who heard them had no doubt that she was talking about Quincy, waiting for her somewhere beyond this life. They buried her next to her husband under the oak trees on the hillside, with a view of the ranch they had built together. The headstones were simple but profound. Quincy Vaughn, 1841–1915, beloved husband, father, and friend Helena Sawyer Vaughn, 1853–1923, beloved wife, mother, and heart of our home, but the real memorial to their love was not carved in stone. It was in the thriving ranch that bore their stamp of hard work and dedication. It was in the descendants who carried their values of compassion and kindness into the world. It was in the stories passed down through generations, teaching that one moment of mercy could change everything. Daniel continued to run the ranch according to the principles his parents had instilled, treating his workers fairly and managing the land with respect. He made sure his own children knew the story of how their grandparents met, how a desperate act and a compassionate response had created the foundation for everything they enjoyed. Grace's medical practice continued to serve Sonora for another 20 years, her reputation for skill and compassion drawing patients from across the region. She never turned away anyone who could not pay, living by the example her mother and father had set. Margaret's adopted children grew up to become teachers themselves, passing forward the gift of education and opportunity they had received. Thomas's descendants continued to work the land, generation after generation finding meaning and purpose in the physical work of ranching. The ranch itself remained in the family, passed down from Daniel to his children and eventually to theirs. Each generation added their own touches, modernized certain aspects, but never lost sight of the core values that Quincy and Helena had established: family, compassion, hard work, and love. And in every kitchen, in every house on that ranch, bread was baked fresh every week, a reminder of where it all began. Some of the younger generation did not fully understand the significance of this tradition, but they followed it anyway, trusting that something important was being honored even if they could not quite name what it was. Decades after Helena's death, one of her great-great-granddaughters discovered the journal Helena had written, tucked away in a trunk in the attic of the ranch house. She stayed up all night reading it, mesmerized by the story of her ancestors, by the love and loss and triumph chronicled in those pages. The next day, she gathered her family and read portions of it aloud, making sure that the younger generation understood the full story of their legacy. She read about the desperate moment when Helena had reached for that bread, about the compassionate choice Quincy had made, about the love that had grown from such unlikely circumstances. "That is where we come from," she told the assembled family. "From a moment when someone chose kindness over judgment, when love was strong enough to overcome fear. That is what we carry forward. Not just this land or this name, but the responsibility to show the same compassion to others that was once shown to us." And so the story lived on, retold and remembered, a testament to the power of a single choice to change not just one life but generations of lives. The bread Helena had tried to steal had been worth 5 cents, but the kindness Quincy had shown in response was priceless, creating ripples that spread outward through time, touching lives that would never even know the names of the man and woman who started it all. The ranch in Sonora, California still stands today, still in the Vaughn family, still operating according to principles of fairness and compassion. The cottonwood trees by the creek have grown massive with age, providing shade for new generations of children who play in their shadow. The house has been updated and modernized, but the kitchen where Helena cooked thousands of meals remains the heart of the home. And every week, without fail, fresh bread is baked in that kitchen, filling the house with the same warm smell that once meant survival but came to mean so much more: home, family, love, and the enduring power of kindness to transform everything it touches. That is the legacy of Quincy and Helena Vaughn, the cowboy and the thief who found in each other not judgment or condemnation but love and redemption. Their story proves that we are not defined by our worst moments, but by what we choose to do with the grace we are given. And sometimes, when we choose compassion over judgment, when we choose to see the person rather than the crime, when we choose love over fear, we create something that lasts forever.